Hello lovelies, in this video we've got a grade 9 analysis of what exactly makes Macbeth a tragedy. Why is it not a happy story, apart from the obvious reasons? But for a grade 9 you need more than just the obvious reasons. So we're going to go into this in depth, and then to help you revise even more, to help you get ready for the exam, over the website it's free set of questions, free set of flashcards, along with all of our example essays.
In this video, we are going to look at what a tragedy play is and how the play Macbeth follows these conventions. A tragedy is a genre where the audience witness the downfall of a typically high-status character. Tragedies do not end positively and often serve to teach us something about the human condition and what it means to be human. Through watching a tragedy, Aristotle, a Greek philosopher, said that a tragedy must excite both pity and fear in the audience. This can also be known as catharsis. What this means is that we should essentially feel sorry for the tragic hero, but also fearful, possibly because we recognise some of the characteristics that lead to the character's downfall in ourselves or in humanity as a whole. According to Aristotle, the tragic hero, the protagonist of a tragedy, should be a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty. This just means that the tragic hero or main character shouldn't be faultless or a saintly human being, but nor should he be an obviously villainous man either. The thing that causes their downfall isn't either of those things. It's a mistake or a weakness that causes it. This sounds really unclear and ambiguous, and actually it's supposed to, because that's what causes the audience to feel an unclear or ambiguous mix of both sympathy and fear at the same time. We're left confused about what humans with a potential to be incredible can become, and that's quite a scary thought. We said that their downfall or death is caused by some error or frailty. That's where the word hamartia or fatal flaw comes in. These mean the same thing. A tragic hero's hamartia, according to Aristotle, is a weakness in their character, or an error of judgment that ultimately leads them to their death. It's important to note that they bring about their downfall themselves. It's their own mistakes that cause it. So how do we see Aristotle's idea of a tragedy in Macbeth then? Don't forget, Aristotle defined a tragic hero as a man who is not good, but also isn't evil either. It's just that their hamartia comes from some kind of error. So Macbeth is a character who, from the beginning, we see as highly respected by those around him, but as someone who is clearly very capable of brutal violence. His misfortune comes not from a wicked characteristic or vice, but as it says, it comes about through his weakness. His ambition. He yields to the witches, he yields to Lady Macbeth, and ultimately that leads him to his downfall. He absolutely brings about his downfall because of his own mistakes and decisions. Of course, there are influences, but his choice to yield to those influences, unlike Banquo who recognises the dangers, that's what causes his downfall. A lot of people blame the witches and Lady Macbeth, but actually Banquo is a good example of a good moral compass, as he was with Macbeth when the prophecies were provided, but he doesn't yield. Other elements of a Greek tragedy. Here are some other key conventions of a Greek tragedy that you can reference in your literature essays if you end up covering any moments that are applicable to these terms. Peripeteia is the reversal of any fortune. It's the point of no return for the tragic hero. For Macbeth, a good example of this is when he murders Duncan. There is no going back from this, and chaos, of course, ensues from there. However, some critics also mark this moment as when Fleance escapes too. This is because, of course, Macbeth wants to secure his power as king and thinks that murdering Banquo and Fleance will be the way to do it, because the witches warned of Banquo's descendants being king. However, when Fleance escapes, this reignites Macbeth's unease. Another term that's handy to know is anagnorisis, which is the moment where a tragic hero realises something critical about their own or someone else's identity. You should imagine it almost like a eureka moment for the tragic hero. For Macbeth, we could mark that as Act 5, Scene 5, when he learns about his wife's death and delivers his nihilistic soliloquy on the worthlessness of his life at this point. Or, again, some critics also mark this as the point where he realises that witches have deceived him. He calls them juggling fiends who are no more believed in Act 5, Scene 8. Now, moving on to A.C Bradley, who was a literary critic who was most well known for his works on Shakespeare. He also explored the conventions or typical features of a tragedy. Here are some of them. Tragedy with Shakespeare is concerned always with persons of high degree. This just means the tragic hero must be a person of importance or nobility. He also said, whatsoever he, the tragic hero, dreams of doing, he achieves that which he least dreamed of, his own destruction. And again, in other words, that just means the tragic hero strives for something and ultimately ends up with what they least expected, in this case, causing their own death. Furthermore, he argued, for the tragic hero there is a total incapacity of resisting the force, which leads them to their death. Or put simply, they fall victim to their hamartia, and cannot resist giving in to it. The final part of a tragedy ends with catastrophe, according to A.C Bradley, in other words, death. Finally, he said, Shakespeare rarely attempts to surprise an audience with his catastrophes. They are felt to be inevitable, and essentially he just argues that we anticipate catastrophe, though we may not entirely know how exactly we get there. Now again, if we apply A.C Bradley's work to Macbeth, let's look at those specific ideas and how they relate. So firstly, we said that tragedy with Shakespeare is concerned always with persons of high degree. Macbeth, of course, begins the play as Thane of Glamis, a lord, in other words, of a great area of land in Scotland, and then Thane of Cawdor, meaning he then holds power over Cawdor too. The fact that he is of such notable importance makes the downfall all the more tragic. It almost intensifies the tragedy for the audience. He was so well respected and caused his own downfall by wanting more and more. Whatsoever he dreams of doing, he achieves that which he least dreamed of, his own destruction. Now Macbeth strives for nobility, power and status. He becomes so consumed by this dream and then secure in it that he is blinded to the destruction he causes to himself. He truly believes, following the prophecies in Act 4 Scene 1, that he is invincible, which further blinds him to his own impending destruction. Don't forget, he said for the tragic hero there's a total incapacity of resisting the force that leads them to their death, and an example of this is when Macbeth even questions why do I yield to that suggestion in Act 1 Scene 3, and states he will proceed no further in this business to his wife in Act 1 Scene 7. And in all these opportunities to reverse his fate and say no, he still proceeds to strive for more power, in some ways because he fears looking weak and powerless, specifically with that second example there. Now finally, we had the idea that Shakespeare rarely attempts to surprise an audience with his catastrophes because they are felt to be inevitable. Of course, there are early clues he is suffering, Macbeth, I mean. We learn he can't pray and won't sleep as early as Act 2 when he kills Duncan, so we could assume he's damned even then. Then his downfall is made explicitly clear in Act 4 when we learn of the army Malcolm is preparing and gathering in England. Now this is the important bit. Apply knowledge to your essays. There are plenty of questions where you might implement this knowledge. That doesn't mean writing everything you know about a tragedy or everything you've seen in this video. It means you might reference one or two of these things mentioned to support your analysis of a moment or an image within the play. For example, if you were given the question, explain how Shakespeare presents Macbeth as a hero, you could delve into what makes him a tragic hero. We could look at the fact that he is of a high status really early on in the play, with an example, of course, referencing the text that you explore and analyse, and an explanation of how he is initially considered heroic in Scotland, and then how his downfall begins to take shape because of his hamartia, showing him as more cowardly and fearful of losing his power than heroic. Another example might be if you were asked about how ambition is presented. You could consider that early on he questions, why do I yield to that suggestion? Hinting early on that he conforms to what A.C Bradley defined as a total incapacity of resisting the force, in this case, his ambition. And if you need a less obvious example of how this could be applied, if you were asked about the marriage between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, for example, you might argue that on the one hand, she is very influential in his decision to kill the king as his wife, but then, on the other hand, you might argue that because of his total incapacity of resisting his hamartia, we could argue it was his own error or frailty and not solely down to exterior forces like his marriage. Ultimately, it's not about throwing context in just for the marks. It's about applying knowledge in a way that fits the requirements of the question, and this comes with practice, so have some practice questions at the ready and apply this knowledge to suit the needs of the question.
Ouch! This is why in some videos I explain scratches.